In the quiet corners of Mexico, where the sun beats down on the dusty roads and life seems to move at a slower pace, a crime emerged so horrifying, it shook the entire nation to its core. Imagine walking through the streets, the air heavy with the scent of the tropics, only for you to discover that the peace you thought existed is nothing more than a thin veil over something much darker. In the year 2021, Mexico was rocked by a crime that seemed to defy belief. A gruesome and unsettling discovery was made: dismembered bodies, scattered and left in a place where no one could have predicted such a thing. This was no random act of violence. This wasn't a one-off tragedy. What authorities found would lead to questions no one could answer and a mystery that remains unsolved to this day. This is the chilling story of the disturbing Mexico murder mystery, the case that left a trail of fear, confusion, and a desperate search for justice. Stay with me as we delve into the twisted details of a crime that continues to haunt the residents of Mexico. It was a routine morning in the small town of Veracruz. The sun was rising over the horizon, casting a faint glow over the streets. People were going about their business, workers opening shops, children running to school, tourists enjoying the quiet beauty of the town. But that morning, the peacefulness would be shattered in an instant. Local police had received a disturbing tip-off. A body, no, multiple bodies, had been discovered in the outskirts of the city, hidden away in a secluded area. What seemed like just another piece of alarming news turned into something far worse. As the authorities arrived at the scene, they were met with a sight so horrific that even the seasoned officers were left reeling. The bodies weren't just left to rot. No, the crime scene was far more disturbing. The dismembered remains of several individuals were scattered across the area, their limbs separated from their torsos, their heads missing. The gruesome act had been carried out with a precision that suggested a level of planning and control that was deeply unsettling. There was no sign of the killer, no immediate clues to who had committed such a horrific crime. Only the bodies, mutilated, discarded like trash, offered any clues. And those clues were minimal at best. The shock rippled through the town, and the news spread quickly. The small community, once quiet and peaceful, now found itself caught in a dark and twisted nightmare. Who could do such a thing? Why were these bodies so deliberately cut apart? And what did this mean for the safety of the people living in Veracruz? The authorities quickly cordoned off the area, launching an investigation into the murders. They collected what little evidence they could find, small pieces of clothing, bloodstains, and other fragments that might help them trace the killer. But there was one problem: the victims had no clear identities. No immediate connections. No missing persons reports that aligned with the bodies that were found. The bodies appeared to have been transported to the area, cut apart, and left to be discovered in the most public, yet hidden, of places. This wasn't the kind of crime that happened in the heat of the moment. This was methodical. Cold. Calculated. Detectives found that the dismemberment wasn't random either. The cuts were clean, precise. This was a killer who knew exactly what they were doing. Some might have even called it surgical, an unsettling thought when it became clear that whoever was responsible had a distinct understanding of anatomy and how to make their victim's body unrecognizable. Local news outlets were quick to report on the gruesome discovery, and in the days that followed, the police began to search for any possible connections between the bodies. They reviewed local crime reports, missing persons, and even started to look at potential links to organized crime. After all, the violence and brutality displayed at the scene had the hallmarks of a cartel or gang-related crime. But as weeks passed, no one could explain what had happened. As the investigation dragged on, a cloud of uncertainty settled over Veracruz. The public was desperate for answers. What could drive someone to commit such a horrendous act? Was it personal, or was it something far more sinister? Some local residents speculated that the crime might have been committed by a cartel, which had been known to operate in the area. There were whispers that the dismemberment was a message, some form of punishment for a crime the victims had committed. Cartels were known for using violence to control territory, and sometimes, they made an example out of those who defied them. Others thought the killer might have had a history in the medical field, someone who was familiar with how to dismember a body with little to no emotion. A surgeon? A butcher? Perhaps it was someone who had studied human anatomy with the intention of causing harm. But the more the police delved into the case, the more questions arose. There were no known ties to any specific cartel, no missing persons reports that seemed to match the dismembered bodies. The victims seemed to have no connection to one another at all. They were simply chosen. As investigators continued their work, a shocking possibility emerged. Could the killings be the work of a serial killer? A murderer who had a pattern of violence that was yet to be understood? The dismemberment was an unnerving act that left detectives with few answers but many disturbing possibilities. Weeks passed, and the case seemed to stall. Then, a breakthrough came. A tip from an anonymous source led police to a warehouse on the outskirts of Veracruz. Inside, investigators found something that made their blood run cold: more evidence, more remains, hidden in the back of the building, concealed beneath layers of old equipment. It was clear now that the killer hadn't just been operating in one place, but perhaps over a series of months, even years. In the warehouse, police also uncovered photos of the dismembered bodies before they were cut apart. The killer had been taking pictures, almost as if they were keeping a record. There were signs of planning, a sense of control in how the bodies were posed and documented. Was this a trophy to the killer? Or was there something more sinister behind it? The investigators now had something concrete. They could see patterns forming. The killer wasn't just acting in anger. This wasn't random. This was someone who took pleasure in the act, who watched as their grisly work was done. And they were still out there. Months have passed since the discovery of the dismembered bodies, and the mystery still remains unsolved. The authorities have poured resources into the investigation, chasing every lead, talking to potential witnesses, and re-examining evidence with fresh eyes. But as of now, the killer remains free. The question on everyone's mind is, who could do something so horrific? Was it a single person, or a group working together? Was it an act of revenge, or a more twisted pleasure? We may never know the true reason behind these murders, but the brutality of the crime continues to haunt the people of Veracruz. As this disturbing Mexico murder mystery lingers, the residents of the town live in fear, wondering if there will be more bodies discovered, or if the killer will strike again. The horror of what happened that day in 2021 has not yet faded, and the scars left on the community are deep. This case, like so many others, serves as a reminder of the darkness that can lurk just beneath the surface of everyday life. No one in Veracruz expected to be confronted with such a gruesome crime. But for those who were, the mystery of the dismembered bodies is something they will never forget. It is a reminder that there are still questions left unanswered, and some truths we may never uncover. Thank you for watching. If you found this story unsettling, please like, comment, and subscribe for more true crime content. And remember, sometimes the darkest mysteries remain unsolved, lurking in the shadows.